what I'm going to present to you is certainly not the typical presentation you would get from any politician. Of course, myself speaking as General Secretary of the Islamic Party of Britain, if I had a candidate up here standing for the Islamic Party, I could do what every politician does. I could say, you have to vote for us. And in that case, I think as a Muslim, you would have very little choice but to do so. Even so, Muslims in the past, when we placed candidates, chose to vote for other candidates than a Muslim standing for an Islamic party, which shows that maybe when people are partaking in the election, Islamic considerations are not the first considerations on their mind. I am going to encourage you, however, to make Islam the criterion by which you decide whether it is in any way wise to enter into these elections or not. But before I do that, I want to dispel a couple of misconceptions. The first one is that the election is all about voting. I do not think that the election is all about voting. In fact, whom you vote for, in my personal opinion, makes very little difference. We have here in Britain a democracy, or what is presented to us as a democracy, which is quite different from the original meaning of the word of rule of the people, because the people don't rule. They elect their rulers every 5 years. And those rulers can do with them what they want. They are not bound by any conditions as to what they may do or may not do. Yes, they have a manifesto. They have certain policies that they put to the people, but whether they actually fulfill them is a different question. They can say before the elections, we don't raise taxes, and they can raise them afterwards, and there is nobody to take them to the court or take them to account for it. Furthermore, if you look at the various parties, there is very little difference between them. They have different emphasis on certain policy issues, but ultimately, you always, if you look historically, and one problem we have is we don't learn a lot from history. And it is said that people who don't learn their history are condemned to reliving it. If you look back, you find that new incoming governments hardly ever reverse the policies of the governments before them. They continue them, because it's much more comfortable to continue those policies. So always politicians will attack when in opposition, but uphold the status quo when in government. Back to my initial premise that the election is not about voting. In my view, the election is about taking part in a discussion. Elections are a public event. Elections are a time when, so it is said, the nation decides which direction it wants to take. Elections are a time when people are there to be questioned. They are the only time you can question a politician. Any other time, he will hardly find the time to talk to you. And if you ask him uncomfortable questions, he will escape. But at election time, he actually comes out demanding that you question him because he wants your vote. Not just that, he comes knocking your door. Later on, as somebody very aptly put it, you can come knocking his door and won't find him. But during the election, he comes knocking your door. The point is, it is an opportunity not to be missed, an opportunity to be made use of. There is little difference, of course, again, in all this wrangling. Many Muslim groups have had many opinions on whether it is at all permissible to participate in elections. And there is another misconception, and that is that Parliament, that place where they have these endless debates that come to nothing, actually has any say in what happens in the country. Whether an MP, when he is elected, actually makes any difference. We've heard it from some groups that sending an MP into Parliament, or standing as a candidate, or voting for an MP and thereby supporting him, is akin to upholding a non-Muslim disbelieving kufr system. We've heard it that it is haram, and there are some people who are very loose with that word. To in any way support institutions that are not Muslim institutions. That you are, by virtue of having voted for somebody, yourself responsible for them making laws that may be against Islam. People go further and say, only Allah has the right to make laws, and here people take to themselves the right to make laws for people. Well, this is of course in itself nonsense, because Allah sets guidelines, establishes principles, and there are some laws, the hudud, that are prescribed, and within that, all of the Islamic law has developed by using judgment. Nowhere do we have a revelation that tells us how to conduct our traffic, whether we should have traffic lights or zebra crossings, or that who comes from the right has first right of way, or who comes from the left has first right of way. Nowhere do we have laws like that revealed. These are all man-made laws, whether you have Muslims conducting their affairs or non-Muslims conducting their affairs. Man-made laws are a part and parcel of human affairs, and likewise in Islam. And the whole flexibility of Islam, the fact that Islam can survive over more than almost 1.5 millenniums now, that the Sharia of Islam can survive, is because it is adaptable. Because it is not fixed to a certain time and place, and it permits the judgment and the renewed judgment over and over again of people. So this is a nonsensical argument. But what is forgotten altogether in this is that Parliament has no say. Parliament is a theatre stage show for public consumption to make us feel as if we participate in the policies that are carried out in our name. Parliament debates those issues, but it does not evolve the policies. If Parliament had a real say, we would find different countries in the world pursuing completely different policies from each other. However, we find that, as always, might is right. Power means that you can dictate the terms, and money means power. And you find that in every country you find the same policies imposed upon people, whether they like them or they don't like them. You find that in this country we follow American ideas since a long time without ever saying no to them. The same goes for France or Germany. There are cultural differences. There are some slight nuances, but on the whole the policies are the same, and if any country wishes not to follow them, they get bullied into doing so. When Germany wasn't quite ready, for example, to join the alliance against Iraq in the Gulf War, claiming that, well, you said we shouldn't involve ourselves militarily outside the country because that was a condition of the peace treaty after the Second World War. That condition was immediately lifted, and Germany was told that they had to take part to show that they care for the interests of the international community, as it is called. When there are sanctions against Sudan, or Iran, or any other country that they choose to put sanctions on, there is no state whose parliament could say, we don't like it, we're not part of this, we have our own interests in the region, there is good trade relations between us and that country. They don't get away with it. So it is definitely not our or any other national parliament that takes the real decisions. And therefore it is a folly for a moment to think that if we get somebody in there, it would make a real difference in policy. Or if we vote for anybody, it would make all that much of a difference. In fact, I mentioned it in this very place some months ago when I gave a talk about the economy, that all three parties, all three major parties, Labour, Liberals, Conservatives, are all advised by Cooper and Lybrand as to regard economic policy. If they have the same advising body, naturally their policies won't differ a great deal. They all tell us that the only way of making ends meet is either to cut services or raise taxes. None of them consider a real alternative like the one Islam would present, of a non-interest-based alternative shared equity financial system. So why should we, that is the other reaction, bother with the elections? Why not just stay at home? In fact, somebody belonging to the Muslim Parliament, Sahib, wrote an article to that effect recently in the paper, said, election day, I will go to bed with a book and wait till it's all over. And again, there is a deep misunderstanding of our role. By turning away from something, you don't actually make it not happen. By closing your eyes, it doesn't mean that it goes away. Little children do that. They say, if I can't see you, you can't see me, but it's not true. And it is about time that as Muslims we grow up and stop being little children, because the behavioral pattern that we have amongst the Muslim communities is still at that sort of mental stage. I mean no insult. But we have a problem that we just haven't learned to deal with the real world. We play amongst ourselves in our pretended environment, pretending that everything is fine as long as the world leaves us alone. But the world will not leave us alone. And therefore, the sooner we come to face that reality and we take an active part in the world around us, the better for us. There is no good, like many Muslim countries have done when one gets attacked, to say, well, it isn't us this time. Keep clear of it. Only when we take active part, and even better if we do so jointly and on agreement. An agreement always means compromise, and compromise always requires tolerance. Only if we do that do we stand a real chance of making any difference at all. And then we have no right at all to withdraw. Yes, a Muslim, of course, has the right to live in a sound society where everything's perfect and he has no need to participate in the process of changing that society. But that sound society does not exist. That sound society is not there. It is a dream. That dream is a vision. That vision can become reality if we work for it. And even if we achieved it, we would have to work hard to uphold it and keep it going. So, Islam is not about monasteries and withdrawal. Islam is about active participation. As the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ told us that if you see something wrong, change it by your own hand. If you can't do it, speak up against it. And if you can't do that, at least dislike it. This being the weakest form of faith. So a Muslim's duty is active participation. What I want to talk about today is about how to participate, not whether to participate. Is about trying to understand how we can maximize the benefit of our involvement, assuming that our involvement is something that should naturally be something we want to do. And of course, again, we have a great number of options. Once we've decided that we want to involve in the political process, and of course I'm happy to go into the details of the justification of that. Maybe when questions about that arise. But once we've decided to get involved in the political process, the first question that arises for us is, what objective do we want to achieve? In line with the advice of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that every matter should be considered in accordance with its prospective outcome. And that, unfortunately, that weakness of not doing that is one of the main reasons why we as a Muslim community in the West have remained stagnant. We have developed a short-term reactionary attitude. We do not plan ahead, because as we say, laws are for Allah to make, plans are for Allah to make. We do not develop strategies. Yes, there are some who do, but in the majority, as a community, as a whole. We do not consider the long-term effects of our action. All we do is, if something happens, we respond. On the spot, as we feel is the best we can do. As we see fit. Almost emotionally. We don't even sit down and consider and think, how should we respond? We simply respond. And if something else happens, we leave this alone and respond to that. So we don't even continue once we got involved, we don't carry it on, we don't continue it, we have no continuity in this respect, we turn our attention to something else. And so we can be so easily manipulated. It happens on the international scale where it's so more easy to see, because if I give you examples of our own immediate environment, everybody feels, oh, this is too close for comfort. We're too involved to even realize it. We don't want to see it, we've got blinkers on, but in the international field we can see it. They can pick on Iraq, and one or the other respond. They pick on Bosnia, we turn our attention to Bosnia. They pick on Sudan, we leave Bosnia alone, we look at Sudan. There's a crisis in Kashmir, we deal with Kashmir for a moment. Then it's Albania, it's something, but it's no consistency, no continuity. And so they can hit us left, right and center, and instead of going through, let's say, a holistic medical program of reform of that body ummah, we keep doctoring the symptoms here and there. It aches here, we take a painkiller. It aches there, we put some cream on. It aches somewhere else, we never look at the cause, and we never look at the thorough course of remedy that might solve the problem. And that is why nobody needs to take us very seriously. Nobody needs to bother about our opinion. Nobody needs to take our vote into account. This is very different from other communities who have a regular involvement with the world outside. And I will go into details why this may be the case that we behave like that. I will do that in a moment, inshallah. But if you contrast it with, for example, the Jewish community, that we in one way hate, in another way admire, in one way denounce, but at the same time have to admit that they've done so much better than us. Half the government at the moment is filled with people who are Jewish. If you get a Labour administration, it won't be any different. They have, of course, it is true, historically, in this country, a little bit a longer history than we do, but at the same time, in quantity, they are much less than we. This doesn't just apply here in Britain. In America, we have a similar situation. We have a Jewish Secretary of State who, I can quote you that, gives you something to think. At the time she was still US ambassador to the UN, said on a radio broadcast, when asked, we have heard that 500,000 children have died as a result of sanctions against Iran. I mean, that is more children than died in Hiroshima, and you know, is the price worth it? She didn't have to think long. She said, I'm talking about Madeleine Albright here, I think this is a very hard choice, but the price, we think the price is worth it. 500,000 children died, the price is worth it. You see the arrogance. And they get away with that. Because 500,000 Muslim children simply don't count. Because even the Muslims don't care about them, because the Muslims are divided into different camps. So you've got to find out, are they the right children to care about? Doesn't matter they're children, doesn't matter they follow no regime, doesn't matter they don't belong to anybody but the Ummah. They don't count. So back to the elections. In my understanding, and when I say my understanding, I present you basically with the philosophy or understanding of the Islamic Party of Britain. Even so, we are not placing any candidates in this election. So we have done previously. Elections are a platform for public debate. And if the Muslim voice is not heard in the election, it means the Muslim voice does not exist. If nobody gets to hear what Muslims have to say, that means Muslims are not important. Full stop. No matter how many of them there are. No American administration could fail to try to find out what the Jews think about this and that issue. No British administration could fail to find out what the Jews think about this and that issue. No American, French, German or British administration could fail to find out what the cardinals, what this church, what that church thinks about this and that issue. What the pressure groups think about that issue. Even what the homosexuals think about that issue. It is important, there are votes involved, they need to know, they need to try and tell them that we have your interests in mind as well. The most perverse cause you could dream of, if you make enough noise, the politicians will come round and say, we've heard you. We might not be able to support you now because there are other people who will not support us if we supported you, but if you support us, we've heard you. Except for the Muslims. Nobody needs to listen to them because they don't speak. And when they speak, they don't speak about what is relevant. That's my next point. Now it is sad, and it is something that I am as sorry about as anybody here. I may sound cynical, I don't mean to be cynical. It is a distressing state of affair, but we do not change something until at least we realize what is wrong. And Allah doesn't change things until we ourselves do so, or at least make a start in it. Allah does not change the condition of people until they change what they are able to do out of their own resources. So it always begins with a strong, hard look at what situation we are in. You don't go prescribing remedies before you actually have diagnosed the disease. And so you have to undertake a very thorough examination. And we have shunned away from that examination. And we have shunned away from that examination because we are frightened of it. It destroys what is left. Because we are a community who feel beleaguered. We feel we do not belong. We feel that we are marginalized already. That is painful to realize that. So the easiest thing for us to do is to pretend that we're all right. It doesn't hurt anymore. It's like somebody addicted to smoking and coughing every morning, but if he says, actually I haven't got a problem, I could stop tomorrow if I wanted to, and the problem's half as bad. He still wakes up coughing, but at least he has somehow calmed his own conscience. That's what we're doing. And the drug that we are hooked on is, you are the best community raised for mankind. Forgetting the conditions that you order good and you forbid evil. Because that's hard work. No, we simply stick to, you are the best community. That's what the Jews had done before. They said, we're the chosen people. Nothing will happen to us. We're great. God won't let us down even if we let him down. Trouble is, he did let him down. And he lets us down as well if we have that attitude. We mustn't go down that road, but we revel in our glorious past. We can say Islam, the beginning and end of civilization. Everything's in the book, don't ask me what, but it's in there. We're never specific. It's always general statements that sound good, but when you probe a little bit deeper, lead nowhere. We do it everywhere. Look around Islamic movements around the world. We do it. Islam has all the answers. What are they? Well, I think you will see. Give us a chance and everything will be fine, inshallah. And then if people are so minded to give them a chance, they will see that nothing changes because they never thought about the problems that could happen once you are in charge. No preparation. So we delude ourselves that everything's fine. We've got a great community. Problems, we don't want to see them. They make us feel bad. Our children, our youngsters, our teenagers having boyfriends or girlfriends? No, not me. My kids? No. We Muslims don't have that problem. Young Muslim girls having abortions? Doesn't happen. No, doesn't happen. Not Muslims. But they have them, but they don't declare it to you. Muslims on drugs? Haram. Muslims in prison. There are Muslims in prison. When I go to prison, I'm an imam in prison. When I tell people, they always ask me, what, there are Muslims in prison? Yeah, where else should they be? I mean, if they do what lands you in prison, where do you expect them to be? Of course there are Muslims in prison. There are Muslims drug trafficking, there are Muslims taking drugs, there are Muslims running prostitution, there are Muslims in prostitution, there are Muslims having abortions, there are Muslims stealing, there are Muslims joyriding, there are... Yeah. What kind of Muslims they are is not the question. The question is that their parents may be the pious chairman of the mosque. And he doesn't even know. And if he knows, it's so shameful he won't say anything. He won't go and get somebody else and tackle the problem, he'll hide it. It's a shame to us that we have the same problems as other people. So we pretend we don't, and then the shame goes away, doesn't it? And we sit in the mosque and we wonder why there are less and less young people. And more of them in prison, obviously, but then we don't go there to see it. But I think you get the idea of what I'm trying to point out. We are an inward-looking community, afraid to look into the mirror. And again, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ told us, a brother, a Muslim, is a mirror for his brother. But we don't do it. We're scared to cause offense. We're scared to be criticized. We're scared to face up to the reality. It's too ugly. We don't want to see it. We smash the mirror. Now it won't bother us anymore. This is how we live. We live in a ghetto. And then people look in from the outside. Of course, if we can avoid it, we would. We don't want them to come in and look. But sometimes they do. Because our children go to school. There is some interaction with the real world we can't avoid. Then they make TV programs about us and make us look so ridiculous, and we say, they shouldn't have done that. They should portray us nicely. It's not fair. And we act sulking like sour grapes and like children again that, why did you do that to me? Not realizing that, as Allah says, whatever harm befalls you is what your own hands have sent before. So the election. A time of debate. The whole nation, many of them of course just cheesed off and caught up in their own problems. But nonetheless the nation gives an opportunity, whether it's taken or not, to discuss the future of what? Of this country and its people. Now there's a very important decision we have to take. Do we belong here or do we not? Are we part of this country or are we not? Are we people of this country or are we not? It doesn't matter where we came from. And the majority of Muslims, of course, increasingly come from this country that live here because they were born here. And if you tell them to go back home, they say, I don't want to go back to Newcastle. If you get my meaning. There is nowhere else to send them back home to but this place, because that's all the home they know. But we have to take a decision. Are we part of it or not? If we're not, then we don't belong here, we should leave. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with doing that. Hijrah is a concept in Islam that is an honored concept. The question is where to make hijrah to, and I won't go into it. But if we do not want to leave, then we ought to feel responsible. Fully responsible. Because you cannot, according to the teachings of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, pass by a scene of a crime and walk away as if it didn't happen. You should either not be there or you are responsible. You have to interfere. You have to do something about it. We can't go on denouncing the Western societies as bad and corrupt and not do anything about it. We are responsible for them being bad and corrupt if we don't do anything about it. And so far we are not doing anything. We're not even putting up any resistance against the inroads that that corruption makes into our own communities. We're too busy denouncing each other for being not so good Muslims. Now, again, there have been different groups who have, after accepting that you should consider what a candidate in an election has to say, put certain questions to them, support certain candidates. I personally, again, I am against blind support for any candidate or any party. There has to be a purpose to it. And if we can do it united, it is better. If we do it individually, we lose a lot of the potential. There are a number of constituencies in the country where the Muslims can decide. They haven't got enough people to elect a Muslim if one were there, but they can decide whether this party or that party gets the seat. And yes, it doesn't matter to us because I mentioned earlier they're both the same, but it does matter to them. And because it matters to them, and if we show that we have a united voting power, they will take care of what we want to ask of them. So there we have something we can bargain with. There is no point lobbying Parliament after the election endlessly and say we want this and we want that, and they say so. And at the time of the election, we've got nothing that they are afraid of. In this society, in this political arena, power and money do the talking. We have got neither. We've got no power, we've got no money. So we have the second possibility. For those people who have power or money, or aim to have power or money, the fear to lose it is as much an incentive as the opportunity to gain it. So if we can make them feel that if they don't listen to us, they lose power or money, that's just as good. That's all we've got. We've got no power, no money to put anybody there, but we can say, if you don't listen to us, we can take it off you. Of course, that doesn't happen if you subscribe to one party, particularly Muslims. Foolishly, when they came here, most of them, of course, being of the working class, thought Labour is the party of the working class, and they all voted Labour. If it's a foregone conclusion whom you vote for, you've got no bargaining power at all. There's no point going to the market and haggling with the person who wants to sell you some cloth and say, I've only got £2, but I'm not going to bargain with you. There's no point. You don't put your cards on the table. In this world that we live in, unfortunately, a lot is make-believe and pretense. The television shows us every day. They can create a whole real world for you, and it's filmed in a studio, maybe 1/10 of the size of this mosque room. They have whole buildings that are a facade and nothing behind, made of paper, or cardboard, or chipboard. And just like Hollywood is all makeup that does not reveal what is behind, a lot of things in this society, advertising, politics, are like that. And there's no point being naive and pretending that we could make an impression by straightforwardly just putting the cards on the table. It is necessary that we learn the techniques, the tactics of how to put our point across in the best way. That we get those people to speak for us who speak the language. That we get those people to argue who can argue in a particular field. That we get specialists on the job. And that we call the bluff sometimes. That we make them believe that we are strong, united and powerful if need be, even if we know we're not. Of course, you can only do that if there is at least some basis or substance of truth in it. There has to be a minimum truth in it. There is no point in a country like, for example, Germany, to threaten Muslim voting power when Muslims aren't allowed to vote. No point. Nobody will be worried about Muslim voting power when the Muslims haven't got the right to vote. But here they do. Now, if we can put that across, the next thing is, what do we want in return from the politicians? And I have read with as much interest as disappointment to a document by the so-called UK Action Committee on Islamic Affairs, the very people who messed up the Rushdie affair so badly, by giving everybody ammunition against Islam and the Muslims, by fighting an author for writing a book that they said we won't read. How can you argue about a book if you haven't read it? How can you say what is in there is bad? I can't tell you how bad. It doesn't work like that. Emotional outrage doesn't work. Who have been fooled at the time by a tabloid journalist who said, if you burn the book, we cover the story. And the very fellow who actually burned the book rose to fame and credibility amongst his Muslim folks in Bradford to the degree that he then started his own halal house buying scheme, took everybody's money and made a run at it. Which is worse than writing a book. But then we never put things in perspective. We always make a big deal about small issues and no deal about the big things. The third holiest place of Islam, Al-Quds, is being raped and violated, with Zionist soldiers sitting off the walls of Al-Haram Sharif. We don't care, but we are worried whether our brother wears his beard right. Longer, shorter, or maybe he doesn't have one. We're obsessed with little irrelevancies. And so I read this proposal that these people put to the Muslims as what you should ask your MPs. And I, a little bit earlier, over tea, went through it with the brothers who took care of me after my arrival in a humorous way. And you could sum it up like this. First of all, we want to be elected too. The first concern is we must have Muslims in Parliament. Never mind why, never mind what for, never mind what they're going to do, just we must have Muslims in Parliament. This is not a demand in itself that's worth considering. I mean, you can put something across like our electoral system is unfair, we need to change it. You can argue like the Liberal Party does for proportional representation. And then obviously, in places where there are Muslims, you will get Muslims representing their constituencies. But simply say, we must be there. And then, the issues, education. All we talk about is the education of Muslims. Muslim schools, religious assembly. We are so obsessed with the little things that we're already happy if an MP says, yes, you can opt out of religious assembly. Yes, you shall have 2 or 3 or 4 Muslim schools. It's doing no good. Makes no difference. There are 2 million Muslims in the country. That means at least half a million Muslim children of school age. They cannot go to 2 or 3 or 4 Muslim schools, even if they were state-funded. I have nothing against state funding of Muslim schools. I was at the forefront of campaigning for them. But it doesn't solve the problem. But if we have a better education for everybody, that includes us. If we can argue for an improvement overall for everybody, if we can argue in the universities for better funding, for better grants for students so they don't have to rely on student loans, knowing that these student loans are interest-bearing and haram for us, then we don't just help Muslim students, we help all students. And now those students who are not Muslims, if we put this case very strongly, will say, thank God these Muslims have some sense and do something for us. And then they will think, these Muslims, oh, you got it. Give it to them. I mean, we don't agree with their ideas, but, I mean, we don't follow their religion. They've got some customs we don't understand. However, you must give it to them. They've done something worthwhile here for us. I've read a letter from somebody in South Africa who said, I don't know which particular region because I'm not very knowledgeable about South Africa. I've never traveled there. But he said that employers preferred Muslims as employees because they were punctual, reliable, had no drug problem, and so on. This is a positive statement that achieves much more than if the Muslims over there had always made a fuss that we must have special rights, special protection, no racial discrimination, this and that, and here and there, minority this and minority that privilege. And it would have been considered a pain. And the employer says, whenever you get a Muslim, they make a fuss. But there, notice that they want to employ Muslims because these Muslims are reliable. And they don't mind them praying. And they don't mind them giving them any privilege that makes them happy because they want to keep them as workers because they're good workers. This is the way to do it. And this applies on a larger scale. We can look at other aspects. And there are very little issues here, very little issues, other than against religious discrimination, against racial hatred, and this and that. There are only two more issues, that is the socio-economic situation. And again, no proposals of how to change the economy of the country, simply saying, our people are left behind. Well, isn't everybody? Doesn't unemployment affect everybody? Are only Muslims unemployed? And then comes family and morality, dealing with cloning and all these things that they are not ethical, a bit about abortion, a bit about the declining values of family. Doesn't do much. If the Muslims cleaned up the red light districts, as they have done in America and have done in Birmingham and Bradford in some places, then that is something that people say, you've got to give it to them. They mean business. If the Muslims went round clearing up the drug problem, rather than turning a blind eye when their own kids are into it, there would be a lot of parents who would be grateful to them. And so my point is that if you have the chance to put something to a politician, if you can talk to him, if you can argue, and you must do it publicly, here is your chance to show that Muslims are not people who want to suck dry this country's hospitality. They are not people who just want to live on the backs of other people and give nothing back. All the sorts of comments you might hear. They are not parasites who've only come in for the benefits. Here is a chance for us to show that Muslims are at the forefront of arguing for what is good. Muslims are concerned about the welfare of the whole nation. Muslims want the health service to improve. Muslims do not, like this silly proposal, argue for free circumcision on the National Health Service. We'd much rather have free dental care for everybody. Saves us a lot of money because we go to the dentist more often than we have circumcision. That's true, isn't it? Only do it once. But you've got 32 teeth in your mouth. You've got to get things in perspective. We've got our priorities thoroughly wrong. And if Muslims argued for free dental care, there would be lots of people who'd join them in that argument. Whereas if they argue for free circumcision, you won't find many people who are interested in that. Nor will you find many people backing you up if you ask for halal food. They're not bothered whether you eat halal food or not. Precisely if they haven't got enough money to buy meat, they're not bothered whether you have a kebab or a burger. They know they can't afford either. So it is about high time that we concern ourselves with the society out there, with the real issues that we are confronted with whenever we walk through the street. That we are confronted with. You can see it when you walk through Edinburgh at night. You can see the problems. Even me who only ends up here every twice a year sees the problems. Don't tell me you don't see them. But when I come again, let's say in half a year's time, the problems will still be there, which means you haven't done anything about them. I'm not saying that you on your own could maybe do something about them. I'm simply stating the fact that nobody has done anything about it, including you. Or on a vital level, in the whole country, again I say, we haven't done anything about it. We have made no difference. And if our presence here makes no difference, why are we here? We are the best community only because we order good and forbid evil. But we're not doing it, so we're not the best of communities. And so for the people, the majority who are not Muslims, we are a burden. And if then we want special treatment, special rights, and say, we don't want to change your situation, we want you to help us change our situation. Why should we? We've got our own problems. And so it gets worse because you get tension. So again, the political process is something a Muslim has to take part in, but he has to take part in it in the reality of what is being discussed. Here is a nation has a direction, it develops, it has a history, it has a future. We've got to look at it in the whole. So when I've come here today, not to tell you vote for this or vote for that, I've come here to say it is your duty to take personal responsibility for your own actions, to take your own decision. Don't let anybody come and tell you do this and do that. You decide what you want. You decide what is right, and you tell them. And you do that in consultation. That's what a Muslim community is for. That's what a mosque is for. That's what the whole thing is about. You say, that's what we want. And when we say what we want, we don't say what we want for us. Because even the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was not sent as a messenger to us. He was sent as a mercy to all worlds. So our duty is to portray, to pass on that mercy, not to us, to the world. There is nowhere in the book of Allah, nowhere is there any description of any prophet of Allah, peace be upon them all, who said, I've been sent to look after myself and my people. Nowhere. In fact, they've gone, and we are nearing the time of Eid al-Adha, the Hajj is starting very soon. They all gone through a tremendous amount of sacrifice to bring the message to those who weren't willing to hear it. And they always brought both the message of right belief in Allah and only Allah, coupled with action to change any injustice prevalent at their time. It always was social action as well. It always was the need to change things, to get the balance right again, to do as much reform as I can. As much reform as I can. Nobody is burdened beyond that, but I am sure that hardly anybody does as much as they can. Hardly anybody. We do a bit here and there if somebody asks us to, and then we say, well, we've done our bit. Let's go and have another meal. No, as much as I can means making an effort, means leaving things out for the benefit of other people. The whole philosophy of Islam is about benefiting other people and thereby repaying some of our debt to Allah, even so it is never repayable. So, we've got an election coming. After the election, nobody is interested. The result won't make a difference for us. Election day might not be so important. Whom we vote for, I think, is irrelevant unless we had a strategy. But what happens until the election, that's the thing. That's where you can put your point. That's where you can argue. That's where you can show that Islam, that Muslims care. And in fact that we have alternatives that are better than what they offer. Because the British people are fed up just as much as we are with being told that there is no alternative, with shadow boxing by different parties, with the pretense that one might be better than the other when they're all the same. And we can make a real difference. We can show a real alternative. We can say, there is another way. We can show it, we can demonstrate it. And it makes sense. That's what our work as Islamic Party, for example, has always been about. And I brought with me today, just fresh off the press, the members haven't even got it yet, issue of common sense that we can purchase if you wish. This time on the issue mainly on human rights. Also there's an article about the election as well. And I photocopied an article about the election that you may take free. But that's what we've been doing. Formulating alternatives. But I must say we have had not, and we have not put up candidates this general election. We have had not a lot of support for Muslims. Because Muslims are obsessed with these things. Free circumcision. How long is your beard? What food do you eat? Do you wear a hat or do you not wear a hat when you pray? And so we have had little support. We've got the ammunition ready to fire, but we can't fire it. Because there is no army. That is the sad story of Muslims in a country where we have a voice, where we can speak and we are not stopped to speak. Where unlike many countries where many Muslims have come from, you do not go to prison for simply stating what you feel is right or wrong. You have an opportunity to put your point of view across. You can make yourself heard. You can speak up for your brothers anywhere in the world. But we don't do it. Some of us have come here because we couldn't speak freely where we came from. But soon we got caught up in the life, looking after ourselves, our families, and forgot that this is the privilege we came for. And we don't use it. And soon it may be that we cannot use it anymore. The Labour Party, in the last party congress, have made it very clear, and of course they aim at the Jewish vote, or even so the Jewish vote in this country is not so strong, they aim at the newspapers who swing public opinion and are run by that part of society. They have made it very clear that one of the first laws they want to bring in is to outlaw any criticism of Zionism and the Jews. To make it a legal offense, a criminal offense, to say anything that detracts from the enormity of the Holocaust. So if you were to say that the Holocaust of the Jews is nothing in comparison with the 20 million who died in Russia under the Stalinist purges, you can go to prison for that. Because you've now attacked what is a holy principle to them. When you say the suffering of the Muslims around the world well exceeds that of the Jews, even so recently they've had a bit of bad fortune, but they've well made up for it by becoming oppressors again, you might get fined for that. And it is always a slippery slope from one thing to the other. So long before we wake up to use our freedom of speech, it might well be taken away from us. I can well envisage this country becoming a more totalitarian state. In fact, we are moving to a more remote government with more regulations all the time, where we have highway tolls, motorway tolls, that at the same time have tracking devices telling precisely where you are, where we have European superstate, soon a world government, where you are monitored, and where your freedom is still there as long as you don't object or protest or are in any way in disagreement with the accepted norms. But the moment you move away from that, and you are seen as supporting terrorism, being a fanatic, being an Islamic fundamentalist, and it's easy to be an Islamic fundamentalist. When I campaigned for a Muslim school in Batley, the papers described all of us as Islamic fundamentalists, and it said they are Muslim fundamentalists, they pray 5 times a day. That makes you a fundamentalist, and by that definition, you don't fit the bill anymore. When American strategic thinking tells us now we have to differentiate between good Muslims and fundamentalist Muslims. We can't dismiss them all, that's too dangerous. We must bring some in and keep some out. Mubarak is a good Muslim. Just so you know what these terminologies mean. I suppose from that he does not pray 5 times a day, otherwise he would maybe be a fundamentalist. So it gives you a rough idea of classifications. So what I'm trying to say is that it's high time that we do wake up. It's high time that we get our act together. It's high time we think of the future. The Muslims in Bosnia never thought it could happen to them. Life was fun. Straight after Eid prayer, they went to the local bar. Never thought it could happen to them. They were so lax Muslims that I didn't think anybody would mind their Islam. But when the killing came, it didn't just hit those who knew how to recite the Quran. They just took one look at you and knew you were of those. They just asked your name or asked you to speak. And if you spoke in the wrong dialect, then that's it. So there's no running away when it's too late. There is no dealing with problems when it's too late. There is no thinking of saving the future generation when we've lost them. There is no point regretting that we argued over who rules the mosques when they are empty. And that's why it's about time we set a new agenda. We think long and hard what we want to achieve, why we are here, how we best do it, and how we manage to do so jointly, irrespective of our differences. If we can manage that, we manage a lot. And we may be too late for this election. But if this election is a catalyst for Muslims to become politically aware and realize their duty and their mission in this country, and get their act together before the next election comes in 5 years' time, if still given a chance, we will be a force that will have to be considered. A force that you can no longer ridicule by just picking one or the other person and saying this is what the Muslims are like. The Muslims in America, for example, are much less concentrated than they are here. America, such a vast country, is so much more difficult to penetrate than this country here. It is so more difficult to get through all the media because there are so many TV and radio stations and papers. The administration is so much more powerful, yet the Muslims in America have, alhamdulillah, managed to be heard whenever there is an issue concerning Muslims. Whenever any Muslim is unfairly dismissed, they manage to get him reinstated if they hear of the case. They have institutions that manage that. They have built people up. They have used their own people, their own nationals, and given them positions in that respect, to the degree that we call them over here to give lectures, when we've got our own people here, but we disregard them. They get a greeting from the president when their festival of Eid arrives. Not that it means much, because the same president bombs their children in other countries, I know that, but he has to pay lip service to them now. I cannot imagine John Major sending us Eid greetings, even during an election. Doesn't that show that there is something missing? They've got a chaplain for the American Armed Forces, a Muslim chaplain. And again, I don't want to say that everything's rosy there and better. But in a much more difficult climate, where America is much more in conflict with Muslim countries, they have, through a little bit of unity, achieved so much more. And American elections are even more difficult than over here. And American politics are even more crazy than over here. So it's not that it can't be done. And they weren't quite there 5 years ago. They never got any greeting from any previous president. So it can be done even if we didn't manage before. But it never gets done if you never get started. And that's what I am arguing for, in any place, in any town, Edinburgh, anywhere. That somebody takes initiative. I can only come here and talk, and I go again. And you can of course walk away and say, nice talk it was. I like that point you made. Wonderful. I've achieved nothing. I hope there is somebody taking initiative, saying, okay, we want to sit down, we want to discuss what it is we can jointly put to the candidates as a program. It doesn't have to be big. Expressing some of our concerns, showing that we have a voice in this town. We are united. We are capable of joint action. Think of a strategy. See what are the most pressing issues in this town, if not nationally. Raise them. Make sure they are issues that don't just concern us Muslims, but everybody here. And get that printed in the papers. Muslims of Edinburgh want these issues considered by any prospective candidate and want answers to these issues to be able to make up their mind whom to vote for. You watch, you'll get replies. But come after election day and ask them, they won't be there. So you have to do it before then. And it may be the start, it may be the beginning of learning to work together in a wider society, not just always in the mosque and the home and the circles. And that's what I'm hoping to achieve. And you can do that by yourselves. You can do that under the name Islamic Party. If you want backing, we're happy to do that. You can do it under any name. I don't care. We've never cared about that. We've never bothered about people do things under our name or under anybody's name. I've never refused to speak on anybody's platform. We've got to learn to work together. We can't be like we've been in an election in Lancashire in one place where we had to be so careful which candidate to select because one wouldn't pray in the other one's mosque. They were all divided on racial lines. They came from this part of India and they came from that part of India. It's the caste system. We've got to get out of that. We've got to realize we are Muslims in Britain, full stop. As Muslims in Britain, our interest is that Britain becomes a better society because our children are most likely going to live here. We want the best for them. We have the duty to make sure that we get the best for them. Nobody else will do it for us. And if we don't do it, our children rightly will have a case against us. It's as simple as that. If we can manage that, if we can do that, that is one big step forward. And others will follow. That's all. It doesn't take a lot. But it means we've got to be switched on. We've got to get priorities right. We've got to move away from thinking things abroad are more important than things here. We've got to move away from thinking our little affairs are so important that we can't see. We have a saying in German where you can't see the wood because of all the trees. We've got to get a wider picture. We've got to take a step back, analyze the situation, see a far distant aim, and then finally work together instead of more and more diminishing each other's efforts by attacking each other all the time. And essentially, it's a sensible strategy because if out of the whole cake you fight over one piece, nobody gets much. Whereas you could divide the whole cake. In other words, we are a minority community. If we keep content with that and just fight who controls that minority, we all losers. But if we manage to invite the majority to come and see that we have something sensible to offer, and the whole society becomes open for us, and everybody gets more than anybody would have got even if he controlled the whole minority, that is a much better proposal. That's all I have to say to you for today, and I hope something positive may come from it, and of course we are open for questions. Jazakumullah khairan wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.